is an adage of internet culture stating that, without a clear indicator of the author's intent, it is impossible to create a parody of extreme views such that it cannot be mistaken by some readers for a sincere expression of the views being gathered.
Roll intro. Get started.
Birds don't exist. Golden retrievers wear sunglasses. Juan Posadas. Let's go.
Welcome to episode 3 of Posadas podcast.
Everybody. We've got something special for you guys today. We've been reading a selection of the works of Juan Posadas, real name Homero Frasnelli, a 20th century Argentine Trotskyist who, among other things, was a believer in the necessity of nuclear war and the ability to talk to dolphins, as well as the fact that there either could be or are, depending on when he was writing, there could be or are communist aliens who are observing us, who will take us to the next level of historical development. Did you enjoy yourself, Levi?
Oh yes, I particularly enjoyed the his strong advocacy for the use of child soldiers for promoting the progress of history.
There were a few worrying comments about Vietnamese child soldiers.
Yeah, and Uganda and stuff.
The child soldiers in Dauphin were really, really inspiring for him, at least from his writings.
Really inspiring.
They were. I've got some really good quotes about his love of child soldiers. Before going in, when I told you about Juan Posadas, did you think that this guy was serious? What was the chance that you thought this guy was trolling?
All right, I gotta be honest here, man. Like, you take one look at a picture of this guy and you just get like the creeps, man. He looks like the sort of person who would start a sex cult.
He went part of the way there.
We're picking people who are like pretty obviously sincere about them.
I think we've already fucked up the guiding mission of Poe's law.
If I just had to read, if I didn't know about his background, I would probably have thought he was just like had sort of like psychiatric disorder, and therefore probably not a troll. But yes, as I know a little bit more about his biography now and about who he is, I'm pretty sure he's very, very serious.
Yeah, the guy was sincere. This is an under 1% possibility of being a troll. Yeah. Now, is it a troll test? It's going to be. I'm exactly the same. Like our is it a troll test is getting more and more perfunctory. We just keep picking people who are clearly sincere. I mean, we did the Unabomber. That guy clearly believed what he was talking about. Posadas.
Well, there's Varg. We've got Varg coming up.
I'm pretty sure Varg
could be a troll.
Talks about. Anyway, let's not get sidetracked and talk about Varg. Let's talk about Juan.
Okay, cool. So
the guy who is not a troll was born Homero Frasnelli in Argentina in 1912 to Italian immigrant parents. He grew up in Buenos Aires, really poor, with I think like 8 or 9 siblings. So when it comes to talking about the working class, unlike a lot of communists, this guy was not laughing. He truly understood what it meant to do a shitload of manual labor for next to no pay, live in horrible, cramped conditions. He's the real deal.
Professional experience included begging on the streets and shining shoes
and playing professional soccer.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I thought that was quite cool.
Yeah, so
he should have stuck with the soccer.
Multi-talented.
Yes.
So during his life, he got more and more interested in the working class movements of Latin America, particularly the Trotskyist movements. He actually became a reasonably prominent Trotskyite in Latin America during his life. However, his influence outside of Latin America was pretty limited. I mean, the extent of his agitation in, say, Europe, where he lived in Italy in the last part of his life, was really handing out leaflets at workers' rallies that other people organised. But in Latin America, he would organise strikes and things like that. So again, he wasn't like a campus Marxist. He came from a very poor background,
he was quite
and took part in labour movements.
Yep. And he was quite a good, well, I don't know what the standard for good is, but like he was a successful like labor organizer.
Yeah. And he was,
and he must been, to some degree, self-educated as well, because he does, I don't know, I guess it depends whether or not he actually read the things that he references, but, you know, taking him, you know, on good faith, he did actually, like, if for somebody who didn't, like, receive, like, a good formal education, like, I suppose he was fairly well read, all things considered.
He read a shitload of Trotsky. Oh,
yeah.
And this will be a recurring theme. His comrades never considered him much of a theoretician. He was noted by many to be unusually enthusiastic when it came to trotters, but was never really seen to be a particularly deep thinker when it comes to Marxism. And in the readings we did, that did become apparent.
Yes.
Another thing that I found quite funny. So I also read, to give myself a bit of background, a book called I Want to Believe, Posadism, UFOs and Apocalyptic Communism by A.M. Gitlitz, which is about Posadas.
Link into the description.
Yeah. It's
use our Amazon affiliate link.
We don't.
If you're so inclined to read about Juan Posadas. Engage in the capitalist system. Give us your money.
I Want to Believe is a good book. I enjoyed it. About probably 80% of it is descriptions of communist infighting, which is not hugely interesting, and it's communist specialty to hate each other more than you hate the capitalists. But the descriptions it gives of Posadas' life are good, and it does go into some of the wackier parts of his life, like when he was towards the end of his life chased out of Argentina by the government, lived in Rome in a villa where he collected a group of adherents and effectively formed a cult, which there are a number of Trotskyists who have gone in this direction, where you get this cult-like figure that makes all of the men around him,
really?
and
that's
it's almost always
for us.
Engage in soul-destroying self-criticism sessions while having sex with all the women. But his works all have a very particular prose style. It's very stream of consciousness, not terribly structured. And this is because he didn't really write much. Instead, he just set up a tape recorder and held court and then got someone to transcribe it, which is why everything in our reading list read like some guy just rambling at you, because that is actually what it was. That is an accurate representation of what this content is.
Yeah, and he makes kind of like broad proclamations and like very forceful language at times.
Very forceful language, very
that's
forceful
definitely
topics.
You could see it as a speech, yes, but all in Spanish as well, so it's all also been translated into English.
Yeah, translated into multiple languages. After his death, he died in 1981. He didn't leave behind a huge movement. I mean, Trotskyism in the context of Marxism is more marginal than, say, Leninism or Stalinism, which controlled the Soviet Union. And Juan Posadas was marginal within a marginal branch of Marxism. There is still there is still the organization. It's called Scientific, Cultural, and Political Editions. They publish some of Posadas's works, and that's where we got a lot of the material for our readings. You can download free PDFs.
And do you think they're publishing that stuff as like here's an interesting historical part of like Trotskyism or something, or do you think like they actually endorse his point of view?
I think, look, there are so many humans alive at the moment that I'm sure there's someone who is a true believer. But maybe this
like,
is where the is it a troll comes in, because Posadas himself, no, definitely not a troll. When you read about Posadism online, that's much murkier. You get the impression that a lot of people talk about him jokingly. And among those people, maybe you'll have someone who truly thinks that, yep, we need global nuclear annihilation for socialism to rise from the ashes of the capitalist world. Is that a troll? Pose law? Hard to say. Much more ambiguous than
we need to like see if we can
himself.
find some. We need to see if we can find some like neo-Posadism.
Yeah, I'm sure it exists. I'm sure it exists. It's the internet. There'll be someone. Right.
Okay. So that's most of Juan's life. Is there anything else other than?
Oh, there'll be a shitload, except I can't remember it. So how about we move on to something else?
Education. What was happening in Latin America during his lifetime? That's important. Because Latin America basically like had a whole bunch of communist movements essentially in various forms, but probably like one of the most important things for historical like framing was that like for those who don't know, like Trotsky actually like fled the Soviet Union to Mexico, and like that's why a lot of Trotskyists came out of Central and South America, because that's where he was, still doing his things and basically just like, you know, talking shit about about Stalin for like the remainder of his years before he got pickaxed. So yeah, that's what was happening in South America.
Yeah, it's sort of not even a 30,000-foot view, but a view from Proxima Centauri of the events of Latin America in the 20th century.
There's a lot of stuff happened.
Yeah. How about we go over the difference between Marxism, Leninism, Trotskyism, and Stalinism before we get into Posadas's actual work, because that will provide some needed context and might make some of his views more clear.
Yeah. So the intellectual tradition preceding Posadas is roughly at a very high level Hegel, and then who developed this thing called the dialectic. And obviously there were people before Hegel, but we'll start like Hegel, and then obviously Marx and Engels, who developed like Marxism and communism, and the labor theory of value, and then Lenin, and then Trotsky, who was kind of like the next evolution, and then Posadism. So as Jack said earlier, like Posadas was a fringe group of a fringe group within a subsection of Marxism. So yeah, pretty small, pretty fringe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was Marx and Engels said, relevant to what we're going to be discussing today, is that history progresses in stages and each is animated by their own internal logic. And that internal logic drives them inexorably towards a series of conflicts and transformations. So you had feudalism in medieval Europe, Eventually, that became capitalism. And with capitalism, you get the rise of the working class. And capitalism is shit, according to Marx. It's necessary to get to communism because there is this series of historical stages, but it's shit. And under capitalism, the working class who are exploited, and they give their labor, and the capitalists, people who employ them, people who own the means of production, generate profit using their labor that the working class don't see. Well, they don't see as much of it as they contribute. And eventually they're going to rise up and have a revolution. They will seize the means of production, the means with which you make, with which you create value. And that's socialism. And under socialism, things are going to be so efficient that you're going to get hyperabundance eventually. Eventually, you're going to get to communism. You're going to have so much stuff. Things are going to be so good that you're not going to need the state. You're not going to need employment. It's going to be a classless utopia. The proletariat will not exist. The bourgeoisie will not exist. The proletariat
will actually like create the society that doesn't even have a proletariat. There's like no class. That's the sort of the end of history. So
it's going to be sick. And as can be heard, we're both probably the world's two foremost experts on Marxism.
Yeah, we clearly know what we're
clearly really good at this. So
extremely deep study of this stuff. So just before we move on, there is one really, and this sort of only clicked for me when I like sort of understood the Marxist reasoning a little bit better, when I understood a little bit of Hegel. So I'll just give like a quick
please do. I've tried reading the Phenomenology of Spirit a few times and have been completely defeated. So I don't want to discuss Hegel. You can do it
at all.
Oh, no, you do it.
Okay, so what? Okay, there's this one core concept. Well, there's a couple of core concepts, but I'll touch on two of them. The first one is like what's called the dialectic, which is essentially like this mode of reasoning where you have like three parts to, say, a discussion. You have what's called the thesis, which is like the initial conditions or, your statement about the world. Then you have your antithesis, which you consider as like a negation or a refutation or an alternative point of view. And then you have your synthesis, which is like, what's the result of like blending the thesis and the antithesis? And there's actually lots of variations on this, like Marx and Engels actually sort of took the Hegelian dialectic and modified it. And that's what they used to come up with what they call like materialism, which is basically this idea that sort of the causal factor of history is the actual materialistic components, so like the modes of production, and so that's how they come up, like with the idea of, okay, well, it's the modes of production that are actually causing the social structures to change. So what's interesting is what they're using to like justify like, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, like they come into collision with one another, and like justifying the revolution is like the current social capitalist structure is the thesis, and the negation of that, the antithesis, is the revolution, and the synthesis of that is like the coming socialist utopia and communist utopia. Now, please, nobody ever quote me on my analysis of that, because I probably got that incredibly wrong. But as far as I could glean, that's roughly the reasoning that they're using to like come up with this idea that history has like a direction, and you can analyze, okay, where is this going, and how can we justify, the proletariat uprising.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
How much did I butcher that?
Sounded good to me for what it's worth. That's probably more of an indictment than an endorsement. How about
There's no fucking way.
I just
man.
remembered this, and this is important. Let's discuss the difference between Marxism and Leninism, because that.
Okay, you take this one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure on this one.
So Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Bolshevik Party, was the party that launched effectively a coup against the Constituent Assembly, which led the Russian Revolution, and formed, what we now think of as the USSR. He developed a slightly different view of Marxism, which fit the circumstances of Russia at the time in 1917. So Marx and Engels said that, like Hegel, you've got this
is such a battle.
this series of stages of history, one of which is capitalism, and you need capitalism in order to develop industry, to develop the working class, who will then lead history to the next stage, to socialism. Russia at that time wasn't particularly industrialized, didn't really have an industrial working class, as, say, Germany did.
Still agrarian.
England did, yeah. It was pretty rural.
Yeah.
So Lenin just fucking retconned Marxism and said, nah, you don't need to progress. What you need is a small group of intellectuals, the so-called vanguard of the proletariat, who can take power.
Of course, of which he was a part.
That is a coincidental detail, that he was the one to benefit. And so they can lead the peasantry to communism. That's an incredibly simplified description of Lenin.
The enlightened few will lead the proletariat. The enlightened with their like, I don't know, Bachelor of Arts from, I don't know, whatever awesome Russian universities there are, is like, okay, we're gonna like lead the enlightenment of the proletariat.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then Lenin died, I think it was 1924, but I don't remember.
Go and have a crack. Commit.
Uncommitted, 1924. And Stalin and Trotsky were two prominent Bolsheviks who were then vying for power after Lenin had died.
Yeah.
Stalin ended up winning. Trotsky was exiled from the Soviet Union, went to Mexico, got assassinated. And while he was still unassassinated and in Mexico, he pretty much just complained about Stalin, everything that Stalin did.
He just spent like years and years and years just talking shit about
Stalin. Just complaining about him. A lot of the time, he never actually disagreed with what Stalin's aims were. He just disagreed. Yeah. I think he just fundamentally disagreed that it was Stalin doing it and not Leon Trotsky.
Sorry, can I
go on?
Can I interject quickly? It's a really important point to understand why, like, somebody like Posadas can come up within Marxism as a kind of philosophical tradition. Is that like they often do agree on the ends that they're aiming at, which is like the communist utopia. But yeah, it tends to often be the means by which one gets there, and that tends to stem from like how you interpret history and the progress of history and all that sort of stuff. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think probably the one of the most relevant differences between Trotskyism and Stalinism that is going to come up a ton, and that Posadas brings up regularly, is that Stalin ended up going with this policy called socialism in one country, where he said, okay, we're just going to focus on the Soviet Union, and we'll make sure we're socialist, but we won't advocate for world revolution. Instead, they just invaded everyone around them and made them socialist. So that it's a different way of spreading the revolution. Whereas Trotsky said, no, there needs to be global revolution. And
simultaneous world revolution. Yeah,
just everywhere. Just anywhere where you can resist imperialism. It's cool.
Historically, like, part of the reason why the the Soviet Union and Stalin took that perspective is because around the same time in the early 20th century, was it the early 20th century? Correct me if I'm wrong. But like there were these other uprisings in like France and like other European countries that failed. And so it looked as though you could have had like a simultaneous socialist uprising like across Europe. However, when like many of the others failed and either succumbed to like, you know,
Nazism.
like I suppose like democracy or like in many cases Nazism, that idea of world revolution at least became in the short term impractical, I suppose.
Okay. How about we get to the meat of it? Let's discuss.
No, there is one more idea.
One Posadas thought. Still.
Apocalyptic
What else have we forgotten?
communism. Apocalyptic. That's the
fucking
defining
Posadas.
feature.
That's
Yeah,
everything we're going to be talking about.
Well, okay. So as a very brief heads up, this is actually called like this. You know, if you look online, it's actually called apocalyptic communism. Posadas is one of them. Anyways, yeah. So let's keep it going.
All right. So we had a reading list, and there was a fair bit. So for context, the things that we read and that we'll be discussing are Flying Saucers, The Process of Matter and Energy, Science and Socialism from 1968, The World Revolutionary Process and the Course of the Partial Regeneration in the Workers' States, which was from 1975, On the Function of the Joke and Irony in History from 76, Childbearing in Space, The Confidence of Humanity in Socialism, 1978. Yeah, I think that's...
Yeah, we can put up some supplementary reading lists on our website. So we'll have, I guess we'll post on the website and like in the YouTube description or whatever.
Yeah.
Like the sources, the specific text that we talk about here, but there's a whole bunch of
there is a lot of
for those
Posadas writings. Yeah, well,
so where do you want to start?
Oh, shit, where do you start with a guy like this? So Posadas wasn't the most ordered thinker.
I would say the world revolutionary process.
Yeah. Let's start. So we'll start off with his least zany and most mind-numbingly boring text, which I would actively advise people not to read. However, if you're so inclined, it's called the World Revolutionary Process. Oh man! So for context, this
the
was
World Revolutionary Process and the course of partial regeneration in the workers' states.
Yeah, this was his speech opening the 10th World Congress of the Posadist Fourth International in July 1975. So the first part of the text is the speech that he gave to open the International. And then the next bit is the speech at the end. There's no real difference in content between the two because by 1975, he was a borderline cult leader and the people at the International were cult members. And the first half is him saying, let's discuss these particular things and see if we will reach these conclusions. The speech he gave at the end of the International was, oh, wow, we reached the exact same conclusions that I proposed in the opening speech. So that they're two speeches that
sometimes you're just right, you know.
Yeah, he has science and Marxism on his side, and he perfectly foresaw the future.
And history with a capital H.
Capital H history. So
it's very disordered.
It's very disordered.
I found it very hard. I found it very difficult to make sense of it. Yeah.
So there's about half of it, I think, is probably not really worth discussing because it's him just complaining about other communists. And the criticism ultimately always boils down to the fact that they're not Posadists. Like that. They're not Posadists. They're not confident enough when it comes to trusting the scientific dialectical analysis of history.
Yes.
And yeah, that's about it. Basically, they're leading communists and they're not Juan Posadas, is his criticism of every communist who is not Juan Posadas, who is more important than he is.
Yes.
So that's like half of the text gone. So this text is so disordered, very discursive. He repeats himself ad nauseum. I felt physically ill at times. That we're just going to read through our notes and we come across something funny where we're going to bring it up and discuss it. And like one of the first things that got my attention was his admiration for child soldiers. Not only are child soldiers necessary for revolution, but they're good. You want child soldiers. And he's got this quote on page 6 where he's talking about. So this is in the context of him complaining about other communist parties not knowing what they're doing, not seeing the way like the Posadists do. So he's talking about communist parties ignoring the contribution of children in Vietnam and Dauphin. And he says of these children that they're 12 and hold a gun bigger than themselves, bigger in the form that is, but smaller in reality, because it is the children who command the gun, keeping it trained on the goal of social improvement. Doesn't that make you want to give a 7-year-old a Kalashnikov?
And then I think on the same page a little bit later, he says in Dauphin, the children are at one with their guns. They participate in every debate and deliberation. Far from being a hindrance, they are one of the factors of progress.
Oh,
so he didn't
sinister.
He didn't. It wasn't just like he was permitting. He wasn't just like, oh well, this is an acceptable part of you have to break a few eggs to bring about the communist utopia. Like he was like, no, they are one of the factors of the progress.
This is a normative statement. It's you want child soldiers.
So they know what they're doing.
So we got 6 pages into this PDF, and we're already hit with Vietnamese child soldiers are sick. So unfortunately, it got way more boring after that. But so
it's what I find interesting about those quotes is that he's speaking with admiration of these children with his freaking guns, man.
I really like how it was phrased.
The most horrible thing.
But how he was saying, they're carrying around their guns and participate in all debates as if having an assault rifle is a necessary condition for having a debate. They would not be participating fully if they weren't heavily armed, which makes you question.
You rock up to a council meeting with an AK-47. We're just participating. We're here to have a peaceful conversation about the Soviet.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
What are your thoughts on child soldiers, Jack?
Mostly, I'd say 95% in line with Juan Posadas.
I think he doesn't go far enough.
The 5% is that he doesn't go far enough.
So,
yeah, then he
just shit people.
He then goes on to talk about how capitalism is doomed and how humanity just fundamentally wants to end capitalism. And that capitalism is preparing a nuclear war. He brings this up really early. This is one of his greatest hits, the coming nuclear war. And so, first of all, I'll just explain what the nuclear war is about. He basically says
war is.
capitalism is so in trouble and understands this at a deep level that it is preparing a nuclear war. It knows it's going to lose, and so rather than gracefully accepting defeat, it's just going to glass the surface of planet Earth, just a nuclear wasteland. but, and this is a sign of capitalism's weakness, it hasn't launched it yet because its people oppose nuclear war. Which I found interesting, that it's a sign of the weakness of the system, that the people who live under the system don't want nuclear annihilation. I would have considered that a fairly rational attribute on behalf of any population, really, being opposed to the nuclear apocalypse. But he says capitalism is definitely going to launch this war. That is unavoidable. But capitalism is too weak to survive the war. So you wipe out almost all of humanity. Capitalism's gone. Socialism is so strong that socialism will rise from the ashes of the capitalist world, and then you will get the utopia. So that leads to this interesting relationship with the nuclear holocaust on behalf of Juan Posadas, where on one hand and I'm not sure how much of this represents an internal struggle on his part and how much represents him just not being particularly disciplined with his thinking or coming to any firm conclusion, or just changing what he believes based on how he feels at the time of day, what he had for his last meal. How sometimes he says this war is terrible, it's going to kill so many people, I don't want it, but we must prepare for it because it's necessary. This is a grim reality. Whereas sometimes he's a bit more pro-nuclear war and he says, well, it's going to be bad, but at least we're going to get communism out of it. And then sometimes he's just 100% on the nuclear war bandwagon, says, oh, this is going to be so good. We really need to do this. Encouraging, at times, the Chinese Communist Party, at times, the Bolshevik Party in the USSR to launch nukes at the US just to kick things off, just to get things going more quickly.
So I've got a good quote.
Yeah.
For the nuclear war. Because he has this, I mean, again, with this idea of like history having like some sense of progress in stages, like it's incumbent upon the proletariat and people like Juan to help like history progress. And so like capitalism is an obstacle. He refers to it as like an obstacle to like the progress of history. And so nuclear war is like an agent by which we can remove that obstacle. So he says, reasoning and persuasion do not exclude the use of force. We propose the preventative war, atomic event against imperialism.
Going to make a war like, so big that there aren't going to be any smaller wars.
It is the same as when some rock obstructs the way. The rock must be cast aside. The rock being capitalism, obviously.
Yeah, I remember this quote. This is such a good one.
We pose war with the sentiment of doing something necessary in history, and not for the sake of one group or the other, but for humanity. It's like the level of incoherence. We're going to have a preventative nuclear war for the sake of humanity.
But that's like saying, as a doctor, you're going to preventatively treat someone for every disease by shooting them in the head. It's like, yeah, they're dead. They're not going to get sick now. It's in the same way, we're going to have a preventative nuclear war. We're going to stop any other wars, but we're going to nuke the fucking planet. So they're not going to be any people to have wars.
For the sake of humanity. For your sake, to your patient, for your sake, to prevent any illness whatsoever.
I'm going to decapitate you.
We're going to have to blow your brains out.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's Posadas medicine.
That's a banger.
Where did you come down on Posadas's thoughts of nuclear war? Did you feel he wanted the war or he was dreading it?
Well, again, I just don't think he went far enough. I think, like, is there something more hectic than nuclear war? If there is, we should do that.
Yeah, it's and nuclear war is definitely up there. Definitely top 10 most hectic things you can do.
So, yeah.
this text was
My mask.
it was pretty boring. Like it's a weird experience reading Posadas because
Pretty boring.
You're super bored most of the time, but every now and then he'll come up with something about nuking the world or water birth and talking to dolphins. But he repeats himself when it comes to the really weird stuff so often that those start getting really boring too. Like you actually find yourself getting bored when he keeps talking about nuclear war. What about?
Yeah, he's very repetitive.
Yeah.
So it would be an interesting question whilst we're on that note about his style, I suppose. Would you say this, like the world, because the other ones were short enough, the other texts that we've got some interesting texts, the other ones, is that they were fairly short texts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the world revolutionary process is like quite a grind.
Yeah, it's like 90 pages.
Would you rather take into account, like, I suppose, number of pages, would you rather reread Bronze Age Mindset or reread the World Revolutionary Process?
Bronze
and
Age
let's scale
Mindset.
it up, like maybe...
No qualification. I would rather read Bronze Age Mindset again.
Yeah, me too. It was so boring.
It's just boring. It's
boring and incoherent, which is a strange combination to read.
He makes voluntary nuclear holocaust boring. That's actually quite an achievement.
Could you imagine how long that speech was? There was some group, I don't know how many fucking people were sitting there like listening to this guy, but some group of people sat down and listened to this guy for like, I don't know how long it would have taken for this guy to give this speech. This was at least like a 45-minute speech or something, at least. Like,
and the rest.
I mean, no, it's getting way more.
Yeah.
Really, it's 90 pages. So they just listened to this guy ramble on incoherently about nuclear war and child soldiers for however long. Yeah.
The problem is
keep that in mind.
most of what he talked about wasn't wasn't nuclear war and child soldiers. It was things like, so he's got this bit here that I just flicked to in my notes where he was talking about Stalin taking over the Bolshevik Party and how this came to happen and how a discussion needs to be had to settle the question of how Stalin came to power. A lot of what he does in this speech is just tell people that they need to discuss stuff. He talks about how we need to have a discussion about something, tells you the conclusion that you should come to when you discuss it, and then tells you again that you need to discuss it. And he was talking about, he basically says Stalin came to power because the Bolshevik leadership was overawed by the power of world revolution and stepped back and focused on local concerns. A lot of them got killed in the Civil War, and the Bolshevik Party let in too many people. It should have remained smaller and more disciplined, but instead they let in a lot of bureaucrats who didn't believe as strongly in Marxism and in science. And then Stalin came to power through that. That it's a boring point. I bring it up because he just keeps talking about this. There are probably at least 5 occasions where he says exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
The insults differ. Did you notice that a really common insult is that he calls someone empirical, and a strong compliment is when he calls someone either objective or scientific?
Yes. Yeah. I had a note about that.
He also
because again, this is against the backdrop of like the philosophy that we explained earlier, which I'm not sure how well versed Posadas was in it. Probably more than us.
That as well.
But yeah, these positions about empiricism, as in like, like deriving knowledge from sense data, essentially. Like apparently that's a really bad thing. I don't know. Yeah.
It's more how he never defines what science is, but clearly he really likes it. That science equals good in the mind of Juan Posadas.
Yes. Well, except like well, science. The thing is like, and we can discuss this with some of his later points, but I guess one of the interesting points to note is that like everything, and I don't know if this is a Marxist thing in general, or if this is a particularly like Trotsky thing. I have a feeling it's more deeply rooted in Marxism. If I actually knew what I was talking about, I'd be able to tell you more clearly.
Our role is not to be deep thinkers. Our role is to be the only people willing to read Juan Posadas or Bronze Age mindset.
Extremely low bar. Look, okay, let's be clear. If you're listening to this podcast right now, you are not here for educational purposes. Let's be 100% clear. There is no accreditation, and we're not even offering any guarantee that you'll be a more worldly or wise person by the end of this podcast.
We're internet anthropologists, Levi. Don't sell yourself short. Anyway, what were we talking about? You were saying something about Marxism before I butted in. This idea of like social relations and like how like a social relation can be like a power-based relationship, like in the construction of Marxism, like the capitalist who owns the means of production exploiting the worker, that's like a power-based relationship. And these social relations, what they call, or what Posadas calls social relations, are like organisms.
The shaping, they are the things that like shape whatever the human pursuit is. So the social relation of capitalism and private property like distorts science that's conducted in capitalist countries. So it's like there's a degree to which science can operate that he sort of talks about within capitalism, but it's like it'll never really fully achieve like the full capability of science because it's perverted by the private property and the incentive structures in capitalism, whereas like under the socialist utopia where everybody is motivated purely by like the greater good and trying to like, you know, achieve the highest dignity for humanity or whatever, like science will attain the kind of like perfection because the people like doing the science will be motivated not by ownership of private property, but by these ascendant like human drives for bettering humanity.
Yeah, and that's the stage at which we'll learn to fully harness all of the energy around us, and we'll be able to, instead of sexually reproduce, because he was quite a prude, apparently. Like
Really?
Yeah. Apparently he was very prudish. He really didn't like what he regarded as
a sex cult, though.
Yeah, it's cool when he does it. But he didn't like sexual licentiousness. He didn't like that the let's say gay people, lesbians were associated with communist parties. He didn't want anything to do with them. That wasn't cool. And so one positive outcome of this socialist science would be that we would develop our control of matter and energy to the point where humans would be able to reproduce asexually. Like we would just divide, like reproduce by binary,
like amoeba. Like he literally says, we already see that asexual reproduction, such as amoeba, is possible. Humans just and travel faster than the speed of light, so that we can perform interstellar travel.
Faster than light travel as humans, well, I guess you would travel between stars and split into like exponentially greater numbers of little Levis. The spaceship doors open and this stampede of tiny little like Levis, you could fit in the palm of your hand, just run out, spread the revolution.
I like to imagine it's like that scene from Fantasia with Mickey Mouse with all the little axes. Little communist Levi's running in through all around Alpha Centauri.
Distributing guns to all of the children.
Distributing guns to the children of the galaxy. And incinerating planets with necessary preventative war. You can't even
nuclear bombardments.
You can't even have a war on this planet. We will prevent all wars on this planet. Yeah, so anyway, what else? Okay, we've got some interesting things. One interesting point. I don't know. We're talking a lot of shit right now. Okay, so just to ground it a little bit back in a slightly more serious direction, what I found very interesting, which kind of like blew my mind when it clicked, and I can't say whether or not this is something across all Marxism. I think if we do a future Marxist episode, I'm going to put more effort into understanding the underlying Marxism. But like, he's got this sense, and it only clicked for me after reading a bit more like of the history and stuff and the philosophy, that when at least Posadas, I think, maybe other Marxists say things like history, he'll spell it with like a capital H, and he's referring to like not something like history, like his history, here's all the records from like whatever historians, or like the anthropological record, or like or archaeology or whatever, and like reconstructing an explanation of things that happened in the past. Like history with a capital H is kind of like a force within material reality that is, I suppose, on some level like an entity that has intentionality, that is like going in a particular direction. And this actually, again, going back to Hegel, it comes from this idea of Hegel, what Hegel called the Geist, which is like we get the word zeitgeist. And again, it's like the spirit of the culture or whatever. And I didn't realize that, like, well, maybe I'm just an idiot or whatever, but like,
look,
like
you did read
like,
almost 200 pages of Juan Posadas, so I'd say we're both idiots.
Like, like these sentences that he says, like, I'll read you this one. Children must learn that history, capital H. So that history with a capital H is the history of the class struggle, and that the classes behave as classes and not as individual persons. Indeed, it is the classes that speak through individual persons, end quote.
Yeah.
So like these things, classes. So you could, coming from a STEM background, you hear something like classes. Well, I heard classes and I thought like, okay, well, a class is like all these individual people have, some property, say like the color of their skin or how much money they make or whatever. And having that property makes them a member of a set, right? And so we'll call this set the class of like bourgeoisie people or something like that. And so the class is like an aggregate of all the individuals. But in his conception, that's not the case. Like, that's an incorrect interpretation of the word class. No, class is actually an autonomous, like, it's an autonomous entity that has like existence independent of the individuals that are the aggregate, and that it somehow speaks through individual bodies. And so when they talk about like the proletariat, they're not talking about the people, the population of people. They're talking about this like sort of disembodied thing that actually has an autonomous existence. And it is actually fighting with this thing called imperialism and this other actual thing called like capitalism or whatever, or the bourgeoisie. And when somebody speaks, they literally mean, like, say I'm bourgeoisie and I'm speaking, like the way they justify discrediting that person's point of view is that like I am just a mouthpiece for, like, say I'm talking on behalf, I'm a bourgeoisie person and I'm trying to like defend capitalism or something. They say I'm just a mouthpiece that's speaking on behalf of like the bourgeoisie entity. And I found that like incredibly, like, I think that's a correct interpretation. I might be wrong, but when that sort of penny dropped for me, I was like, oh, these people are insane. like completely ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that's a Marxism.
What
thing in
are your
general.
thoughts?
Yeah, it's hard to say whether it's.
Am I completely off base here, or am I like?
That's certainly how I've felt when I've talked to Marxists, that I'm regarded as an avatar or an instance of
Yes.
a particular class.
Abstract class white male. Instance of abstract factory white male.
It's like
create Jack.
It's like the object-oriented programmers of philosophy. Spent too much time coding up stuff in Python.
So and that's just absolutely baffling to me, and I think it all comes back to Hegel, actually, like, because Hegel's the one. So it's essentially, again, going back even further to Nietzsche, like, again, we try not to do this too much, but like Nietzsche basically, in short, one of his criticisms of like what was going on was that with the death of God, he said like, God is dead and we have killed him, and one of his concerns is that like, okay, well, we're going to fill that void somehow, and it's going to be the state that will fill the void. And you know more about Nietzsche than me, so correct me if I'm wrong about this. But like, there seems to be this kind of deistic tendency amongst humans to like look for an external thing that's like greater than us, and say you could do it with theism or deism, or you could do it with the Geist, as Hegel would say, or you could do it with quote unquote history with a capital H, or you could do it with like the classes and the class struggle. And there's this constant sense of like, there's these things that are external to humanity and they're objective and they have intentionality and they're acting through people on history.
Yeah, you certainly get a religious feeling from reading Posadas. Just that, I mean, for him, history or dialectical materialism effectively serve a theistic function.
That's what it seemed like to me.
Yeah, they're these immutable forces that exist independently of humans, or maybe in some sense with history, humans are the substrate within which they exist, but they exert influence upon humans.
And let's be clear, like, it's not as if Posadas ever explains any of this.
No. No. All of this is purely conjectural.
This is me trying to like cobble together like some semblance of like what the fuck this guy is talking about without having read any Engels or Marx. So I promise the audience, and I promise Jack, if we do another Marxist, and we will do more Marxists because I want Marxism to be like a recurring category of the show.
There are a lot of
I am going to go away. I want to read the Little Red Book personally. I think that'd be a banger. As in Chairman Mao's Little Red Book. So like I'm gonna go away and read Marx and Engels, but to me, like, if the audience, if you don't know what we're talking about, I'm not entirely sure that we do either.
I think
it's incoherent.
It is incoherent. It really is incoherent that Posadas has thought. How about his view of democracy? His democracy is something he actually does define, and it's a fairly different definition to what I expect most listeners are expecting.
Do you have a quote?
Yeah, so he talks about how we need democracy when there is the revolution, when everything is centralized, when all economic decisions are planned. This needs to be done democratically. It cannot be done with technicians or experts. From my reading of it, he wants people to effectively have direct democracy in deciding production targets, how you are going to meet production targets, and things like that.
Yeah.
But the way that the people will discuss what they want, both in terms of production targets and the type of political regime that they want to live under, that will be democratic, but it'll be Posadas democratic. And in his view, free speech is good and you should have it. But free speech means the freedom to discuss things that are relevant. And for him, something is relevant basically if it leads to Posadism. And yeah, so I mean, something is relevant if you are discussing how to influence the economic context within which you live. And the economy must allow the masses to develop their lives and intelligence. But you can only develop your life and your intelligence via state-owned property, workers' control, workers' councils, no private property. So pretty much socialism or communism.
Yes.
Yes. And yeah, so yeah, this is a quote. The right for every person to think is not the hallmark of democracy by any means. To think, yes, but for what aim? In the name of what? If this is unspecified, democracy is an abstraction which serves the strongest. So you should speak freely, but only if you will reach the same conclusions as Posadas.
Yes. Yes. The interesting thing that I thought, and again, I don't really want to get into quote unquote refutations per se.
No, it's pretty hard because he never really explains anything.
The show. But it just when I was reading about the direct democracy stuff and like allocating resources and that sort of thing, I just thought like that
isn't like, that what already happens?
That's how we do like that essentially, like if you're voting on your resources by spending money and telling the economy where to allocate resources through transactions, that's essentially like achieves the same goal. But of course, then you would have to have private property rights. and we can't have that. So somehow you've got to have like an efficient allocation of resources amongst an entire population who are all going to vote on everything and discuss everything, and nobody has private property. And this is one of the other. This leads us to one of the other points. The guy really hates. Not really hates. No, he really hates private property. Private property. Complete ban on private property. Okay. He also has a dislike for, because he's a Trotskyist, right? He also dislikes like the Soviet Union insofar as like it's a giant like bureaucracy, I suppose. So he always talks crap. Sometimes he'll like criticize capitalism and in the same sentence like criticize the bureaucracy of the Soviet state, for example. And then like 2 sentences later he'll talk about, oh well, we're going to have to like have like councils or Soviets, like councils, and vote on everything and like have these structures. And I'm just like, how is that not the most bureaucratic way that you could possibly structure? Like we have to have councils on councils on councils on everything, and we all have to discuss every single thing together, and then have direct democracy, and somehow we're going to get things done. Anyway, as I said, we're not going to get into reputations.
I think you're looking at his language in the wrong way. You should take bureaucracy to just be... Please. Yeah. Bureaucracy is just a negatively valenced term. A Soviet organ or a Soviet organism is a positively valenced term for the same thing.
Yes, I forgot.
I think to a large extent they refer to the same thing. It's just when he talks about bureaucracy, you know that he doesn't like it.
Yeah, and well, of course, if it's something to do with Stalin, then or the one country revolution, then it's a bureaucracy. But if it's a global nuclear holocaust that leads to a bunch of councils, then it's a communist organism.
I found a really good quote about democracy. The workers' state the proletariat, the workers' state, the proletariat, gives to each the possibility to write, to speak, and to say anything necessary, anything but what is in contradiction, in opposition with the interests of the workers' state. This is democracy. Okay.
It's literally not democracy. It's literally not democracy. It's democracy in that you can say what the state wants you to say.
Yeah. Oh, I just found a really good bit in my notes. Do you remember the bit where he was talking about abstract art?
No, I don't.
Or have you just suppressed that memory?
Yeah, maybe I didn't get up to it.
Look, he doesn't like surrealism, doesn't like cubism, doesn't like them. And his disagreement is not aesthetic. It's something more profound.
Oh God, I must have missed this bit.
So the reason why people will paint in a cubist style or a surrealist style is because, well, when they're doing it in good faith, I should add, is because they live in a world where there doesn't exist a way for them to rectify the problems of capitalism or to rectify social or political problems or economic problems that they see around them. In that context, it's okay to be a surrealist because you're painting to escape the world, to find joy somewhere else. He's big on joy. He talks about the need to find joy quite often.
Yeah.
But now that
here's a happy-go-lucky fella.
Now that not merely does communism exist now, but Posadism exists, right? There are workers' states, and there is Juan Posadas theorizing. And in that context, it's really not acceptable to paint something other than socialist reality. Because before they were trying to escape the world to find something joyous, but now there is something joyous. There is Posadism. And the fact that they're painting cubist shit and not Posadist stuff, that's degeneracy. I'm pretty sure he actually does use the term degeneracy. Yeah, he calls it degenerate.
Again, I just think that he didn't go far enough.
What would you paint?
He should have been calling for all art to be depictions of Posadas utopia.
I'm pretty sure that was what he was calling for. I think he just accurately conveyed Juan Posadas' thoughts. You thought you were joking. You were just being accurate.
Hey, should we move on to flying saucers?
Yeah, let's move on to flying saucers because the rest of this particular speech was just so boring. It's mostly stuff that we've just it's just him saying over and over again that the Soviet bureaucracy sucks.
He repeats himself a lot.
America sucks. We need to nuke everything and start again.
Imperialism sucks. Capitalism sucks.
There was a good bit at the end, actually, where he talks about, this is the quote, "Our ideas and our energy are inexhaustible, although we lack in the financial means to give them their full expression." He just starts asking for cash. Linked to Posadas' Patreon description.
At some point.
His Bitcoin address.
We should do that. We should start a Posadas revival Patreon or something.
Funnel all the money to my ETH purchases.
Just buy NFTs, buy commie NFTs. It's funny that organizing the proletariat, if it's such an effective means for running a society, why do you need to ask for money to get it off the ground, mate?
This is something that this is almost like like theology in that you're trying to explain something that he has said previously using something else somewhat related that he has written later in a text, because he didn't bother explaining himself at all. Hence why we are performing the Posadas exegesis that we are at the moment. I think that might be an acknowledgement of how fallen our current world is. So he talked about how socialism in one country can't work because you need to trade.
Yeah.
And capitalism is corrupted. If your country is socialist, but capitalism has corrupted all the countries around it, you will need to trade with them using some form of private property. Someone somewhere in that transaction is going to have to own something. So you can't have socialism in one country. And in the same way,
and this,
I see this.
Why we need a world revolution.
This as my theological analysis, as similar to when he asks for money, because he doesn't want to own private property, but he's acknowledging that when you exist within a capitalist context, as he does, he still needs some cash.
He still needs some cash money. Yeah. No.
All right. So
luckily, like when you have a perfect functioning socialist society, you don't have to have a medium of exchange because everybody will just voluntarily do stuff for the greater good. As we know, like obviously, it's a given. Yeah. Well, this is history.
Reading this after the fall of the Soviet Union as well is.
Oh yeah, I guess
makes it somewhat harder to take seriously.
Well, that's an interesting point. Like, I suppose when he was writing, but then again, so he was writing in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, right? So, interesting. Man, last century sucked, didn't it? Far out.
It was pretty shit.
Pretty bad. Jesus. Okay, flying saucers. Let's do it.
You want to go to flying saucers? Yeah, let's.
Yeah, wait, I'm gonna pull it. No, you go. Do you want to give an introduction to the text, and I'll?
Okay. So this one was called "Flying Saucers: The Process of Matter and Energy, Science and Socialism." He wrote it in 1968. It really is about what it says on the tin. It's about communist aliens.
Yeah. So straight out the gate. This is how much he thinks of the Soviet Union. Straight out the gate, second paragraph, opening sentence, it just says, in the Soviet Union, studies are being conducted on the possibility of surpassing the speed of light. This ability may have been acquired on other planets several millions of years ago and already being used. And he basically goes on to say that, like, if you can acquire like faster than speed of light travel, you can only have gotten there through communism.
Yeah. I think you just summed up the entirety of this article. It's basically...
if there's aliens, they're going to be commies.
Yeah, it's weird because he veers between hedging and saying, look, I'm not saying there are aliens, but some pretty credible people have said there are aliens and have met them. And then sometimes just says there are aliens.
There's been a lot of sightings.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of sightings. We can't take them all seriously, but it's like, well, come on, at least a couple of them I've got to be serious.
Yeah, but every now and then he'll just say there are aliens. Anyway,
I want to believe.
That'd be pretty cool. But and as you said, the only way that they could reach the level of technological advancement to make their flying saucers and come reach us is if they were communists.
Yeah.
They're
because
peaceful.
Like, obviously
they're peaceful.
So
because he talks about how people who have met aliens are always overcome with this feeling of serenity. And that means they're not they're not hostile, which means that they can't be capitalists, which means that they have to be communists.
Yes. And as I think we discussed earlier, like, in order for science to progress, right, to the zenith of what science is capable of achieving, you can't do that under a capitalist system with private property and the egoism that private property induces in the scientists who are actually doing the science, right?
Mm.
So in order to like achieve these great things such as like fast and speed of light travel, obviously we need to get rid of the corrupting force of private property.
Oh,
So
oh yeah. And the aliens have done that already.
And yes, so obviously, again, like a sufficiently advanced, the reasoning is essentially any sufficiently advanced society must necessarily be communist in order to have achieved that level of technological sophistication.
Yeah, and then he goes into this weird shit about earthquakes,
which is pretty funny. Like in hindsight, you just think like, well, the Soviet Union got pretty good at making film-based cameras, I suppose, and like making a couple of rockets, but like it's sort of like kind of the opposite happened. Anyways,
yeah. What about
again,
that bit?
No more commie bashing.
There's this quote here where he's talking about a Japanese scientist who says that we shouldn't waste the energy of earthquakes, and I really liked this quote because it combines Posadas's love of, I mean, he was very optimistic about technology. So his technological optimism combined with his more messianic impulses. So the Japanese scholar also said that we can predict, contain, deviate, and indeed make use of this energy. As an aside, the energy contained within earthquakes. The Posadists said the same thing at the time of the 1961 Chilean earthquake. And I really like this quote because it's like, if you Chileans had just listened to me, Juan Posadas, you wouldn't have been destroyed by this earthquake. You would have harnessed it. You would have benefited. But you ignored the Posadist International.
You'd be in energy surplus right now. If only you'd listened to Juan.
Only they just listened to Juan. And then,
let me see what other notes are. Sorry, go on.
What about that bit about human lifespans? He every now and then does say things that are just factually wrong.
Yeah, there's like 170. Humans have been known to live to 160.
Yeah,
but on average,
the
it's
quote.
Like 80.
The longest human lifespan is reported to be 160 years. So, not that I'm aware of.
Probably not.
No, and then his stuff about time. He started talking about how time is a capitalist construct.
Yeah, in order to like check in, check in, check out of work, have deadlines. I mean, I hate deadlines as well, right? So I'm kind of on board.
But he talked about how
maybe I'm a Posadist.
He talked about how there are some non-arbitrary divisions of time. So say weather and seasons. Those aren't arbitrary. Those aren't just manifestations of a malevolent class, the capitalists. But apart from those, time has no significance.
Yes. Yeah.
And you think, yeah, but what about the time of day? There is a material difference between 12 noon and 12 midnight.
Yes.
I don't think that's arbitrary because I can't see in one of them.
Jack, I think the problem here is that you're disagreeing with one, and you should stop that.
Well, yeah, I should be more democratic and exercise my free speech to agree with Juan Posadas.
You're not being democratic enough right now.
I'm being insufficiently democratic. But then aliens, because they are advanced and they are democratic and they have
and they are
speech,
democratic.
they don't have our illusions about time. So he says regarding aliens, why should they have deadlines and billings, debts to pay by due dates, or the need for heart transplants? He kept bringing up heart transplants in this particular article as being evidence of capitalist decay, because he says, look, if we were communist and had all of the technological advancements that came with that, we wouldn't even need hearts. I mean, so a heart transplant,
and we certainly wouldn't need doctors.
Yeah, it's a symbol of capitalist decadence. Yeah. He's not a big fan of heart transplants. He then calls upon aliens to come to Earth and help us, help overthrow capitalism. Yeah. And when he says that, I don't know what he means, because if you take that in the context only of this article, then you would think, well, maybe they'll give us some sort of knowledge and teach us how not to be capitalist. If you take it within the context of his broader body of work, I just think of them as firing nukes from orbit. My impression of aliens...
That makes sense. I mean, you can have both, right?
How would you view it? Do you think when he's calling for aliens to come and help us, he means they can come and teach us how to do all of the cool stuff that they can do? Or they're going to come and nuke the shit out of us?
Well, I think one of the cool things that aliens can do is nuke the shit out of humanity.
Yeah.
Which is a very communist thing to do. So, like, I think that's one of the many things in the repertoire of alien technology. Human annihilation is one of the things that can be accomplished, which is in line with communism. Apocalyptic Posadist communism, the true communism.
Yeah. And here's a good quote. I found a quote about the scientific applications, or the technological applications of Marxism. He says that with hardly any previous knowledge or preparation, a person scientifically equipped with Marxism and the dialectics can tackle any problem in any specialty.
Yes, yeah.
You hear that? You're studying wrong.
Any problem. Yeah, well, this is the stuff I was talking about earlier about the dialectic, the Hegelian dialectic. With the synthesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and he means it. I've actually got a quote on that. He says, "Matters of extraterrestrials and flying saucers do not put the dialectical methods in any doubt whatsoever. Indeed, they confirm it. The dialectical method gets reconfirmed at every turn." So even he's like, "Yeah, the fucking aliens will be on board with the dialectic, mate." Like, come on.
Yeah, well, the only reason they're visiting is because they are
faster than speed of light. They are on board, yeah. And you can't
if they weren't
faster
on
than
board,
speed
they
of
couldn't
light travel without a dialectic. So, yeah. Oh, so basically, he's how do I put this? He's basically pro UFO, which I'm pro UFO.
That's a point of agreement.
And the only way that we can get there is through communism. So
you want to move on to childbearing in space?
We agree, or the function we agree with him wholeheartedly.
Oh, that goes with
childbearing in space.
Or do you want to talk about the function of joke in history? Because that was a pretty good one. You want to talk about jokes or childbearing in space?
Well, how much is there to talk about with childbearing in space that adds to the UFO stuff?
Not much. I mean, it's more of his love of the cosmos, how he talks about how the Soviets are experimenting with childbearing in space. And this is an example of the confidence of communism and the fact that capitalists aren't making people give birth in space.
Okay.
It's a sign of capitalist decay.
Why don't you quickly explain that? We don't have to spend a long time on this one. Just explain that point and maybe we can have a quick chat about it.
Yeah. Well, how about I give you this quote, which sums up a lot of this article. The Soviets are setting out to experiment with the gestation of a child in space. This could be one of the forms that love will take in the future. So this is classic Posadas. Pretty mystifying, not much explanation going on, but very sci-fi.
Yeah, I think that's where, again, I agree with him. Like, childbearing in space, definitely something to think about. He's very sci-fi. Very sci-fi.
Mm-hmm. He talks about how in the future, we have economic systems at the moment that are mismanaged because they're managed through competition, on the basis of private property, which just leads to chaos. Once you centralize everything and eliminate private property and have monopolies, prices come down inexorably. Yes, and he says in the future, I mean, these economics that you'll be relying upon to centralize everything, they're dependent upon mathematics and programs and electronic brains that are only getting more advanced. So things are just going to keep getting better so long as we centralize. Yeah, I mean, apart from that, there are a lot of weird quotes about.
It's kind of got more of the same stuff, like capitalism and oppressive science, like how good is the proletariat, like let's go to space, like
that's everything. how about we talk about the function of the joke in history, because that is a bit different, and that's that's pretty weird.
Yep.
So why won't we be making jokes in the future?
Well, because as far as I can tell, it's because the only reason to make a joke is if you're not joyous. And obviously in a communist society, everyone will be joyous all the time. So there'll be no need to tell jokes, as like forms of like criticism or dissent or like making your situation more joyous than it currently is. Everything will just be perfect. So there'll be no need for jokes.
Yeah.
Am I misrepresenting his point of view?
It was a bit hard to it's a bit hard to pass. So this was written in 1976, the function of the joke in history. Yep. In this article, he says that jokes will disappear in 20 to 30 years. So we're actually being completely sincere. I have no sense of irony, and I cannot even conceive of irony, because we are we are in a post-joke world. He starts this by saying that social relations are the most important thing in society and for humanity, and that a joke seeks to elevate an insufficient social relation, and that once the relation is sufficient, and under communism it will be sufficient, then jokes will not be necessary because you won't need to elevate an insufficient social relation. I didn't really understand that.
Well, okay, so like this is what I was saying about the importance of social relations. I've got some quotes from like earlier. This is from Flying Saucers. Okay, so basically he has this quote that says, "It is social organization that determines the scientific capacity of human beings. In the socialist society, social capability will be unlimited." So he has this like syllogism that basically goes, social relations, so like how people relate to one another, leads to producing certain human capacities and capabilities, and those define the limits of like understanding and how people interact. So, for example, to quote again from Flying Saucers, "The possession of riches is a distortion in the social organization of human sentiment. The human sentiment is fraternal and collective, but the possession of wealth causes degeneration in it. The bourgeoisie class can have neither the inclination nor the perspective to develop society objectively, in that they are corrupted by this social relation of private property." Okay, so and then here's a quote from Childbearing Space, and I'll get all the way up to the function of joke in history and tick. "The consciousness of humanity could only reach this peak, the peak of like childbearing in space, because the proletariat is the only class in history that can think as humankind. The historic future of the proletariat is not as a proletariat, but as humankind. The proletariat can only develop further as a class by disappearing as a class. Such is the permanent resolution, capital P, capital R, today. in fulfilling the superior phase of its development, the proletariat must disappear, which is the construction of the new society. Observe how the proletariat grows in the disposition to think in the name of humanity and not just as a class. This is what it started when we started building the Soviet Union. So when he's talking about like joy is not a state of spirit, but a conception of human relations, he's talking in this backdrop of like everything, like absolutely everything is determined by like how humans relate to one another. Like all the way back in the other text, like how science is conducted and whether or not we can achieve like full scientific capacities and all of these things is a consequence of how humans relate to one another. Are they doing it through like fraternal and collective spirits, or are they doing it through private property and the degradation of the human spirit?
So this is why from 2006 onwards, jokes and irony have not existed.
Yes, because we have transcended private property.
Nice. I don't think we have any more to add.
Does that make any sense at all? Or
no. Not to me, it doesn't make any sense. Well, considering that at the moment, most memory of Juan Posadas is in the form of memes. Like he is mostly a meme at this stage. And memes are nothing if not ironic.
Hold on, I've got to look up a Juan Posadas meme.
Yeah, the function of the joke in history.
Okay, and that's why maybe we should. Anyways, we didn't. Maybe we did, or maybe we didn't explain it well enough earlier. But like social relations, and it's from Marxism in general, is like a really important concept. And it again, if you want to move on. He had this nice quote on fashion in the function of the joke and irony in history. He says, "The tie is a residue." I actually really like this quote. The tie, as in the necktie, is a residue of the capitalist regime. It expresses no capacity, but the relations imposed, the solemnity of capitalism. It is absurd. A meeting of communists with a tie. So communists don't need ties. None of that. Ties. Because we only wear ties because we're operating this hegemonic capitalist system where we have to wear these fucking ties.
Yep. How about quickly we go over the relationship with the animals and socialism from 1978. There are a few nuggets of gold in that one. The basic premise is that under socialism, not only will there be no more animal exploitation, but humans will... Here we go. The quote. "In due course, humanity will be making an experience of life so rich that even wild animals will stop being wild." He talks about how once we've got socialism, more animals will become tame. There are some animals that won't become tame and some that will go extinct. He says that rhinos and giraffes will probably go extinct. I don't know why those two specifically aren't cut out for socialism, but if you want to see a rhinoceros or a giraffe, better do it quickly.
He just doesn't. He doesn't explain. He just
drops that and then he leaves.
He just picked. He then later says like, "Well, elephants are really intelligent, and like they're probably going to survive." It's like, okay, so of these three famous like African animals, savanna animals, like we've got rhinos, they're out. Giraffes, they're out. Elephants, keep them. We've got elephants, they're good. Why?
Yeah.
Why? I don't know. Well, it's part. Elephants are intelligent, right? That was his.
Yeah, maybe it's that. And then he talks about how we will be able to communicate much better with one another under communism because the social relations will be improved, and that will extend to animals. So he says, when the intelligence of communist society is established, it will beam outwards in all directions and towards all the animals. So the reason why...
this is like electromagnetic radiation, just emanating out from the communist utopia into the animals.
I mean, the only reason that I cannot talk to a German Shepherd at the moment is because we do not live in a communist state.
Yeah.
Once
Which
that
makes
happens,
sense.
then which makes sense. And once we have removed the barrier of private property, then you can finally talk to your cat. Not to a rhinoceros, though.
Look, I'm pretty on board with this vision of the future.
This seems pretty good. This is pretty good. He unfortunately, so he did continue this thread of talking to animals in the later stages of his life. He got really into sort of in 1980 or so, he got really into the thought of Igor Tchaikovsky, who was a Russian midwife who was really into water birth,
dolphin guy,
and believed that if you gave birth in water, the baby will be much healthier and will be able to talk to dolphins, which is, I mean, self-evidently positive. True. And beneficial to the global communist revolution. Unfortunately, Posadas didn't live. He didn't live much longer. You know, having discovered these ideas, he died in 1981. So I'm assuming the only reason why I'm not sure why communication with dolphins is necessary for revolution is because Posadas didn't have long enough to develop this line of thought.
Such a shame, man.
I know.
The things humanity has lost.
What have we lost?
Truly.
He does.
Truly.
He did
a
write.
Great mind.
He wrote in 1980 an article called "A Baby is Born in the Water," which was posthumously published in 1984. But I think it's in French, and I don't speak French, so it's. If any listeners really want to learn about why water birth is a good thing, and you speak
translate
French, just go for it. Tell us what it's like.
Translate it, send it to us.
I would actually quite like to know, because the problem is short. The problem is it's an article. It's a scan of a newspaper article, so I can't just feed it into Google Translate or something like that. Otherwise, I would have. But I mean, I suppose I could type it out. But I can't be bothered. I don't want to learn. I don't want to learn the secrets of water birth that badly.
I've got. Let me see. What's Oh yeah. So I had this point about that was interesting. That kind of again comes up again and again. It's I think I said it earlier in the episode, which is like. Marxists, and it's not just Marxists, but let's take Marxists in particular for now, because we're talking about Marxists, tend to like view like things like humanity or history as these autonomous entities, or to some extent, if they're not autonomous entities that have their own inherent existence and like intentionality, at the very least, humanity is a homogenous thing that you can talk about. And so he has this quote, we went to educate ourselves to the zoo. So he went to a zoo, that's why he's writing this article. We went to educate ourselves for the task that consists in helping to harmonize the human being, the animal, and life as part of nature and the cosmos. Humanity already strives towards this aim. Humanity longs for the harmony that unites all the forms of life as part of the organization of nature in the interests of all. So I just had a note that like Posadas, but also other Marxists, for some unexplained and assumed reason, like they assume that they are the person who is able to know, assert, and communicate the aims of humanity or of history or of the proletariat or whatever it is. You know, it's kind of like, I just get this sense that like it's like elevating, in this case, Posadas to the level of priest. For some reason, he knows what the goal of humanity is, and we just have to like take his word for it, because for whatever he's engaged in the Hegelian dialectic, to like come up with these objective facts about history. And yeah, I don't know. That was just one of my notes that I had.
I think
Just
you're being
for some
unfair.
unexplained reason, they can always speak on behalf. Yes, I probably am being unfair.
Yeah,
and undemocratic
because
here.
if you let people discuss things democratically, and I'm talking democratically, they will reach exactly the same conclusions as one Posadas.
Oh, and then he had this another interesting part. It's just like, again, just another thing that you get when you read Marxist stuff, is that like there's always the view, you're always viewing everything through like the class construct. So there's another quote he had: humanity is the ruling class. The ruling class drills its own concepts into humanity. In our behavior towards the animals, what you see is the power relations of the humans towards each other. Our relationships with the animals will be in the future. Our relationships with the animals will be based on the appreciation of our common origins. The animals stayed. Oh no! Anyway, so I won't read the rest of that.
You just lost
basically
interest.
like. No, I just realized like halfway through the quote that I was like, oh no, wait, that's not making the point that I'm trying to make. Anyways, like everything is like everything is viewed through the lens of social relations and classes and stuff, and even this interaction with other animals. And I guess like on some level I can understand what he's talking about. Like you're going to a zoo and you're seeing all these like animals locked in cages or whatever. Anyways.
Yeah, I'd feel bad for all the animals except the rhinos and the giraffes. They fucking deserve it.
Yeah, fuck them.
Fuck them. They're not going to survive. They're not going to be elevated like every other animal. I reckon that's
oh, okay.
it.
So
that's,
wait.
That's been all.
No,
of
just
ratings.
one more exit to private property, just to drive home that we dislike private property. With this visit to the zoo, we sought to be preoccupied with the question of where humanity comes from, and this in order to know where better humanity is going. The obstacle in the way is knowing better is private property. For humanity to know where it comes from and where it goes, it must end private property. There we go.
Nice.
That's it.
That's
one.
That's it. How about let's wrap this
I'm
up.
sorry we have subjected you to this person's worldview for the last hour and a half.
We have to fucking read it. Listeners can't complain.
I just don't even know what to say. Like, I guess you read more than me, you poor son of a bitch.
I read a lot of red flag articles. So on
oh god.
Yeah, there's a collection of scans of, I think it's Red Flag, an English language Posadas newspaper. I read quite a few of those articles. There are some pretty funny ones. There's one where he accuses the Castro regime of having Che Guevara killed. That was pretty good. There was one where they talk about how the Pentagon ordered Kennedy assassinated. That was pretty good. They've got a lot of pretty wacky stuff. It's just, it's a shitload of stuff to read. I'm pretty sick of reading one Posadas.
What have you taken away from this journey through Juan?
Honestly, my main thing is that it's really boring. He made nuclear war boring. that is my main takeaway.
Nuclear war and
really
UFOs boring. He must have been like charismatic in person or something, because these were all speeches as well. So.
Yeah.
I have nothing to say about Juan Posadas. Do you reckon he was a troll?
So, how about in terms of was he a troll? No, of course not. The guy's dead serious. His life was endangered for his beliefs as well. Right? There were some Posadists in Latin America who were killed. Yep, for being communists. But this guy believed what he was saying. I think a more interesting question is, are Posadists today trolls? And that's way more unclear. With people talking about Posadas today, I would say the majority are trolls, because this guy's ideas are pretty wacky. And if you go over the abridged version, if you hear the abridged version of his thought, it's funny to talk about. If you actually read what he wrote, or the transcripts of what he said in speeches, it's mostly boring, but it's good meme material. Just say, like, that Trotskyite who was into nuclear war, aliens, and talking to dolphins. That's good. That's good meme material.
That's good meme. That's good keck. Yeah, fantastic.
Yes. So Posadas, not a troll,
was
Posadists today, or people who talk about it online.
Modern Posadas.
Most of them are trolls.
Probably trolls.
Probably trolls.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of
cool. Well,
what would you rate the book? Oh, the collection of articles that we read out of 10.
The anthology. Oh God, like on the previous two, I joked a bit. I just like, fuck this guy. I have no interest. I have no interest in like being charitable towards Juan. No, this guy's garbage.
Yeah, I'd give this a 2.
I'd rate him democratic out of 10.
Democratic out of 10. I would give him 2 enforced democratic opinions out of 10. I was not convinced whatsoever. It was fucking boring. And
he's a reactionary piece of shit.
The wackiness was just didn't redeem how dull it was. Not recommended.
Yeah. You could have cut out 80% of the words and just kept the zany stuff, and it would have been fun.
Yeah, but it wasn't.
No. Would you do you agree with his vision of the world?
I mean, yeah. Why not have a nuclear war?
Yeah.
I
think that's the
default position is nuclear war. You need to convince me as to why we shouldn't have one. Talking to dolphins, that'd be pretty good. Being able to like divide into 2 jacks that are half the size, that's pretty cool.
Amoebic division. Yeah.
That's pretty
I'm on board with a lot of his
Faster than light
proposals,
travel,
really.
That's cool. There's a lot of cool stuff.
Tick, that's pretty cool. Being able to live for 1 million years, can get on board with that.
That's cool.
The complete abolition of all private property,
and the abolition of deadlines and paying bills on time. That is good. That's good stuff.
Yeah, that's good. And getting rid of neckties.
No ties.
Can get rid of neckties. That's fine as well. No ties, no deadlines. Live for 1 million years.
Anyway, Juan Posadas, highly recommended.
The really sad
Everyone
part
should read everything that he's ever written. We're convening a meeting of the Posadas 4th International.
We're going to have the 4th International, 5th International, the Neo-Posadas.
The Neo-Posadas 4th International.
With Jack and Levi. We should go to Argentina and try and start a 5th International. I think we'd probably get killed, hey?
Look, if it means I can form a sex cult, then give it a try.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll stop talking crap now.
Yep. So tune in for next episode. Next episode's going to be an interesting one on Varg.
Get excited.
I expect everyone to listen to a bit of black metal, play a bit of Miffarog, get in touch with their Nordic heritage, whether it exists or not. And we'll talk to you. We'll talk to you next time about Varg.
Goodbye.
Bye.